Hey class, welcome back. We are entering now in this lesson into the problem of matter in pre-Socratic Greek thought. There are going to be several conceptions of matter that we examine and several different senses of materialism. And in this early period of Greek thought, the question of matter and materialism, these hadn't yet been fully formulated. So what we're going to see is how they gradually unfold, and how what we would now today call materialism as a well-founded philosophical school of thought was not yet present in ancient Greece. But what was present was a way of conceiving of matter and of the problems related to materialism that was emerging slowly. So they were dealing with it in ways, but hadn't yet really fully formulated the idea of materialism. So first of all, we have Hesiod, who we've already seen previously. Hesiod, in his Theogony, if we remember, that's his epic poem that chronicles the birth of the gods, the creation of the gods and goddesses, and it's kind of like a history or a story which chronicles the events one after another as the earth is created, as the gods are created, and as humanity is created. So at the start of his story, at the very beginning of the universe, when the gods are first coming into existence, what exists first is chaos. And we usually think of chaos as just randomness, disorder, things being chaotic, like loud and hard to understand, disorganized, these kinds of ideas. But this isn't what the word meant for Hesiod. For Hesiod, the word means a gaping void or an opening. The root of this word is very ancient and goes back before Hesiod, and it meant such as like a gaping mouth when your mouth is completely open, right? Or something. So this Hesiod makes the primordial state, the most original state of the universe, is an opening, a void. And it's in this void, this empty space, that things can come into existence. So they come into the void. They enter into existence by being placed into the void, by being manifested in this void. Now, this is kind of hard to think about, very abstract, and there's a lot of theoretical problems that would immediately pop up when we think about this. Like, if things come into existence in this, well, then they had to be put into it, meaning they had to exist somewhere else first. These kinds of theoretical problems, conceptual problems, they don't really get at what Hesiod was intended by this. He thinks that it's this vacuousness that always is required for anything to exist, and it's only by this opening up that anything can come into existence. So even with the theoretical problems, it still has this necessity for him. So that's our first conception of matter. Our second conception of matter in ancient Greek thought comes from Thales, or at least he's the first person to really formulate it. So Thales thinks that all reality, all of nature, has one underlying reality to it. There's one substratum, one stuff that it's all made out of. Matter in this conception is the substrate, or the stuff underlying everything. So in this sense, matter is that out of which, not that into which, but that out of which things come to be. And You'll remember from the David Graeber reading from Debt that he links this idea to the conception of coins. So he says it's no coincidence that Thales was a citizen of the city of Miletus. Miletus is a Lydian city in Greece. Lydia is the greater area in Turkey. And Miletus is the city in which the coins, it was a very rich port city, and it was the first city in Greece to mint coins. And as you see, that's around 600 BC, and Thales is around 624 when he's born. So this happens right in the middle of his life. And so what is it about a coin that is similar here? Well, it's pretty literal, right? The coin is made out of silver. It has an underlying substrate of silver, and then we stamp it with a face of a god or something, this name of the city or something like that. We stamp it with a symbol, and the symbol will be the form, and the substrate is the silver. So this is our second conception of matter. So just to review those, we have matter as that into which things come into existence. We have chaos or an empty void, and along with Hesiod, we also have Anaximander, who was another philosopher from Miletus. He was one of those who came after Thales. And then Anaximander said that the universe comes to be out of the unlimited. And the unlimited is very similar to chaos in that sense, because the unlimited is something constantly in flux, but without any determinate quality. It's a plenitude of existence. It's everything, but at the same time, it's nothing, in the sense that it's not any particular things. It's not trees and rocks and humans, horses and things like that. It's not nature in the sense that we know. It's a complete mix of everything. So chaos more in the sense of the way we normally mean it, which is just complete disorderly mass of stuff. But it's not stuff in the sense of that from which something's made. It's the sense of an unlimited extension of void into which things come to be. And then we have, second, the coin conception, we could call it, the matter as that out of which things are made. We have Thales of Miletus, as we said, who thought that water was the basis of everything. And then we have Heraclitus, who said that fire was the basis of everything. And there were many more besides these, and who gave other, it's water, it's air, it's fire, these kinds of elements which are the basis of everything. And so we can take Thales in a kind of ungenerous way and say that, this is a silly idea that everything is made out of water. That's ridiculous. But we can also take it in a more generous way, and this more generous reading comes actually from Aristotle, as well as others through history, but Aristotle was the first to kind of defend Thales, even though he doesn't think Thales is correct. But basically what he says is, well, Thales doesn't mean water in the sense of a glass of water or the water that we find in the ocean and things like this. It's not water as a particular object which underlies everything, but it's what water represents as a property. What are the properties of water? Water flows, and water gives life. So animals and plants, they need water, and events in the world continuously are changing, and water is flowing and changing. So he thinks that water is as this kind of metaphysical property of nature, of reality, is this flowing of it. And so he's not saying that everything is literally just water, but that everything underlying it, so we see particular trees and animals and these things, but what underlies those things, just as the silver underlies the form of the coin, is this perpetual flux. And the same idea is in Heraclitus, who we will see in the final week of the course. We'll come back to Heraclitus. He thinks that fire is this underlying thing. And what does fire do? It flows as well, and it's perpetually changing. So that idea is also there, but fire also consumes and other things like that. So we'll come to that later. But in this early Greek conception of matter is what underlies everything, in the way that the silver underlies the coin. So now, moving from this idea of conceptions of matter, we're going to now shift slightly to the idea of materialism. So these aren't exactly the same. There's conceptions of matter, and then there's materialism. So what's the difference? Well, one of the forms of materialism is what we just were talking about. Materialist will be someone who explains the universe in terms of matter. So there are two ways to do that, as we already saw, the method of Hesiod and the method of Thales. But that's not all of what materialism is. By materialism, we also mean a certain way of living life, a kind of ethical principle, a moral principle. So materialism in this sense is as a goal, directing one's life in pursuit of material wealth. And we find actually a close link between the conceptions of matter and this idea of directing one's life in pursuit of material wealth. So let's look at that for a second. If we take matter in relation to the coin, as we said, it can be the substrate of the coin, but there's another sense of matter here too, slightly different, a little bit of an ambiguity which we need to pull out, because there is a difference there that we need to be attentive to. We also use a coin as a means. So in one sense, the silver is a means to making a coin, right? If we want to make a coin, we need some kind of metal, and silver is a good choice for that. It doesn't tarnish easily, and it's hard, and there are many properties of silver that make it a really choice-worthy kind of metal. And from this, we can move one step further. So a coin is also a means of acquisition. So we have a coin in order to purchase something with the coin. So here we move from we can use this base matter to form the thing that we want. We can make a silver coin. But now we have a silver coin, and we use it as a means of acquisition. So here we take one step further. We're no longer dealing with explaining what the underlying reality of something is, but we're saying that this is usable, it's useful as a means to an end. So here's where we get our next step towards our second form of materialism. Material wealth is a means to an end. And in materialism, the argument is that the end itself is gathering material wealth. So if a coin is something we use as a means, that means becomes the end in materialism. So let's take a step back now and from making these distinctions and look at another Greek figure who comes later and kind of synthesizes the ideas of matter and of materialism and approaches it in a new way. So for Democritus is widely considered an atomist, which means he believes that nature is made up of atoms. he says that all that exists are atoms and void. So let's say a couple things about what this means. Atoms for Democritus is not really the same as what we mean today by atoms. So the Greek word atom, it's actually atom, it's the same word. Tome means to cut, and the A at the beginning is a privative, it means a negation. So not cut or not cuttable. That's what an atom means. It means that which cannot be cut down into anything smaller. And Democritus didn't think that an atom was like a tiny little sphere, because, right, a sphere already has a certain width to it. You can cut it. Rather, he conceived them as points, a mathematical point, right? Something infinitely small, cannot get any smaller, and you cannot cut it in any way. So he says that everything is composed of atoms, infinitely small parts. Well, then the question is, what is between these points? So in geometrical theory, you can't have a point touching another point. You can have a line between points, but a point cannot touch another point. So in order to explain this problem, he posits the idea of the void. So here we have a synthesis of the two theories that we just examined. You have materialism in the sense of that into which things are put, that's the void, and you have materialism as that from which things are created, and that's the atoms. So things are made up out of atoms, but they're put into the void. And the void is a complete emptiness. It's a complete non-being. It has nothing, no character to it whatsoever. So then Democritus explains the diversity of the world that we see, plants and animals and rocks and all of these things. He says that the differences arise because atoms are distinguishable from each other by their shape, their size, and the arrangement of their parts. Now, exactly how an infinitely small point can have shapes and sizes, that's something that history has not necessarily been very kind to Democritus on. But anyway, this is his idea and how he tried to explain it. Really what is key there is the arrangement of the parts. So what makes things different from each other is how those atoms are combined. And here we have a little excerpt from a recent scholar on the topic that is going to help us really frame our idea of Democritus. So the question is Democritus a materialist in the full sense? And what I mean by materialist in the full sense is basically our modern conception of materialism. So a modern materialist would take all of these parts and try to combine them. They would say that basically atoms in the void, except explaining it through more scientific methodologies of today, but also materialism in the sense of the value of human life, so and human action. So what is the value that can be gained in life? Well, the materialist, the full-blown materialist, would not be able to say that there is any value in in life that isn't a material good. So Democritus, in this sense, will not be able to be called a materialist. And let's read this passage. Democritus believed that happiness was a property of the soul. He advocated a life of contentment with as little grief as possible, which he said could not be achieved through either idleness or preoccupation with worldly pleasures. Contentment would be gained, he said, through moderation and a measured life. So what he's saying is that you're not going to be able to acquire wealth and material goods and be truly happy. All that material wealth and goods can give you would be a preoccupation with worldly pleasures. And even if you want to be poor and an aesthetic, aesthete, this kind of idleness will never bring about happiness either. So we cannot characterize Democritus as a materialist in our modern sense, and that's what I'm really trying to hammer in at this last point here. When we look back onto Greek philosophy, we will bring terminology which didn't emerge until much later, such as this term materialist. This word materialist doesn't really exist in the Greek world. Democritus didn't call himself a materialist, and neither did Thales or any of these people. Aristotle says that they explained the world in terms of matter. And then thousands of years later, people said that means they're materialist. But as we really pull at their thought, we find that there are conceptions of the world which are not completely assimilatable to materialism in the way that we understand today. So Democritus does not actually reduce everything down to matter, and the only good is not material good for him.